Silence. It was the first thing Anya registered each morning, a deep, expensive quiet that settled over the Sterling estate like dust motes in a sunbeam. Outside, the world might be stirring, birds chirping tentatively as the light grew, the distant hum of the first city traffic gathering momentum. But within these walls, the pre-dawn hours were reserved for the absence of sound, save for Anya's own measured breathing and the soft, almost undetectable rustle of her uniform. She stood in the enormous kitchen, tying the strings of her plain gray apron with hands that knew the knot intimately after 15 years. The kitchen itself was a cathedral of cleanliness and cool precision, stainless steel glinting under the faint, strategically placed emergency lights. Copper pots the size of small drums hanging in silent, polished rows like ancient sentinels. The island countertop a vast expanse of gleaming marble, cold and unyielding beneath her fingertips. 15 years. A lifetime, it felt like. She had arrived here a girl, really, barely 20, fresh from the village, full of rural stiffness and wide-eyed hopes that felt almost naive now. She had clutched a small, worn suitcase and the address written on a scrap of paper, the weight of her family's expectations, a physical burden on her slender shoulders. Now she was a woman in her late 30s, her body bearing the quiet, persistent ache of long hours spent on her feet, of bending and lifting, of repetitive tasks performed thousands upon thousands of times. Her hands, once nimble from working in the fields alongside her father, were no longer soft. They knew the bite of industrial-strength cleaner that made the skin peel despite the thin rubber gloves, the dry heat of ovens that left faint, permanent red marks, the delicate, terrifying weight of antique porcelain that cost more than her annual wage. The routine was a ritual, ancient and unchanging, governed by the Sterling's unseen clock. The moment her feet touched the cold floor of her tiny room in the servants' wing, a room barely larger than a closet, without windows or personal touches, the day began. First, dressing in the uniform, the heavy, institutional fabric a second skin. Then, the silent descent to the kitchen. The air would be cold, still, carrying the faint, lingering scent of last night's cooked meals, quickly overtaken by the bracing smell of polish and disinfectant from the night-cleaning crew. The first task, always, was the coffee, the deep, fragrant scoop from the silver canister, inherited from some long-gone era, the careful pour of filtered water into the gleaming machine that cost more than her family's house. Then, the tea, Mrs. Sterling's special blend, imported from some faraway land, steeped for precisely 3 minutes, timed on a small, discreet timer she kept in her pocket. No more, no less. A second longer and it was too strong. A second less and it was weak and watery. The toaster required vigilant, almost obsessive monitoring. The Sterlings preferred their toast a specific, elusive shade of golden. Anything darker was deemed burned and pushed aside with disgust. Anything lighter, anemic, and sent back. Anya had learned to read the subtle shift in color under the kitchen lights, the almost imperceptible scent of perfection just before the point of no return. While the coffee brewed and the tea steeped, she would lay the table in the formal dining room. The room felt less like a space for eating and more like a museum exhibit, rarely used beyond breakfast, and the occasional, much-dreaded formal dinner party. Dark wood paneling absorbed the light, heavy velvet curtains shut out the world, and portraits of stern-faced, long-dead ancestors stared down from the walls with eyes that seemed to follow her movements. Anya would arrange the silverware with surgical precision, each fork, knife, and spoon placed according to an unwritten code she had learned through years of observation and silent, sometimes humiliating correction. The linen napkins folded into intricate shapes, swans one day, lilies the next, geometric precise squares on others, were starched so stiffly they felt like paper, scratching faintly against her rough hands. Crystal glasses, polished until they caught the scant light and scattered it in cold, sharp rainbows across the table. This was her domain, these quiet, early hours. Before the house woke, before the demanding voices began their daily litany. It was the only time the estate felt truly hers, a vast, empty shell she could inhabit without being seen, without being judged, without the constant, low-level pressure of someone watching, someone finding fault. She would straighten a rug that was already perfectly straight, adjust a picture frame that hadn't moved, brush an imaginary fleck of dust from a polished surface. Her thoughts, usually kept in a tight, protective box in her mind, could sometimes wander here, in the silence. Back to her village, small and dusty, and poor perhaps, but full of warmth and laughter that echoed in narrow streets. To her mother, her face etched with the worries of a hard life but quick to smile, her hands strong from a lifetime of work. To her younger sisters, Alara and Sophia, whose education she had funded year after painstaking year, with the bulk of her wages, whose futures were being built brick by painstaking brick on her sacrifice. She had come to the city seeking opportunity, a way out of the grinding poverty that had claimed her father early from a preventable illness. The Sterlings had offered that opportunity, a seemingly generous salary, room and board, the promise of stability. She had written home, in careful practiced sentences, full of cautious optimism, about the grand house, the importance of the family she served, painting a picture designed to ease her mother's worries and make her sisters proud. She hadn't written about the isolation, the constant low hum of disrespect, the way her individuality was slowly erased, replaced by the generic title of the help, or the maid. To the Sterlings, she wasn't Anya, the girl from the village who loved to read tattered books she found abandoned, who could coax reluctant seeds from stubborn soil, who could mend anything with needle and thread. She was simply a function, a part of the house's elaborate machinery, as necessary and as easily overlooked as the central heating or the intricate plumbing. "Anya, the toast is cold," Mrs. Sterling, her voice like snapping twigs. "Anya, I asked for less sugar. Are you even listening?" Mr. Sterling, his tone heavy with practiced impatience. "Ugh, Anya, seriously, did you even see the dust on this table? It's appalling." Clarissa, trailing a languid finger across a surface she hadn't touched in weeks, as if testing for contamination. "Anya, find my phone. I left it somewhere in the West Wing." Bianca, already lost in the glowing screen of her tablet, the demand tossed out like a crumb. They rarely used please or thank you. Orders were issued, complaints were made, requests were barked across rooms or from the top of the grand staircase. Eye contact was minimal, fleeting, as though looking directly at her might somehow diminish them, might force them to acknowledge her as a fellow human being. She had developed an almost supernatural ability to filter it out, to let the words pass through her without lodging in her heart, without drawing blood. Years of practice, years of reminding herself why she was here. For Mama, for Alara, for Sophia. Their letters, infrequent but cherished, smuggled out through a friend of a friend returning to the village, were her lifeline. Their news, their small triumphs, their continuing health. These were the things that sustained her in the quiet, invisible life she led. Alara was studying to be a teacher now, Sophia a nurse. They were her quiet triumphs, the secret garden of her sacrifice, tended in the hidden corners of her mind. But the garden felt far away, a fragile bloom threatened by the sterile air of the estate, the constant pressure of service. This morning felt heavier than usual. A dull ache pulsed behind her eyes, a tiredness that sleep couldn't seem to touch. She had woken from a dream of home, so vivid she could smell the wood smoke and damp earth after a rain, hear her mother singing a lullaby she hadn't heard in 2 decades, feel the rough wool of her father's favorite blanket. The abrupt return to the polished silence of the Sterling's kitchen felt like a physical blow, the dream world shattering like glass. As she carried the heavy silver tray laden with perfectly brewed coffee and a delicate porcelain pot of tea into the formal dining room, the air seemed thicker, the silence more oppressive, filled with the unspoken demands of the day stretching endlessly before her. Mrs. Sterling was already seated, a vision in pale silk that shimmered in the morning light. Her face a composition of sharp angles and smoothly stretched skin, untouched by the worries that creased the faces of women like Anya's mother. Mr. Sterling was at the head of the table, partially obscured by his unfolded newspaper, a formidable barrier between himself and the world, including the woman who facilitated his life. Clarissa and Bianca drifted in moments later, their voices already filling the room with a high-pitched, self-absorbed chatter about a party the night before, about who said what and who wore what. Anya poured the coffee, her movements smooth, automatic, learned responses etched into her muscle memory. She placed the toast in the silver rack, the butter dish and jams arranged precisely, the milk pitcher filled to the brim. She was a ghost in her own life, a functionary observing a play she had no part in, except to ensure the props were in place and the actors comfortable, utterly unaware of the effort required to maintain their effortless lives. As Bianca launched into a lengthy, self-absorbed anecdote about someone's tragic dress at the party, Anya felt a vibration against her hip, insistent, demanding her attention. Her phone. It was always on silent, tucked away where it wouldn't offend the sensibilities of the household, where its cheap plastic casing and simple screen wouldn't clash with the antique elegance surrounding her. She ignored it at first, a lifetime of ingrained discipline kicking in. Not now, not here. Work first. Always work first. But the vibration persisted, a frantic, urgent pulse that cut through the frivolous chatter of the dining room, louder than it had any right to be. It wasn't the lazy rhythm of a spam message or the predictable buzz of a news alert she never had time to read. It was insistent. Something deep inside Anya, the part she had kept dormant for so long, the part that was still the girl from the village, flared with sudden, sharp alarm. This felt different, urgent, terrifying. She excused herself, murmuring something about needing more hot water. An unnecessary lie. The kettle was full and hot, and retreated to the butler's pantry, a small room off the kitchen, hidden from the main house by a swinging door, filled with the scent of dried herbs and lemon polish. Her hands fumbled slightly as she retrieved the cheap phone from the deep pocket of her apron. The screen glowed with a new message. Elara, a name that meant family, home, love. A name she rarely saw on her phone except for infrequent updates. The message was short. Mama is very sick. Hospital. Urgent. Call me. Followed seconds later by another, shorter, sharper. It's bad, Anya. Very bad. Doctors don't sound hopeful. She's asking for you. Anya's breath hitched, catching somewhere in her throat. Her mother. Her rock. The woman who had raised 3 daughters alone after her husband died, who had never complained, never shown weakness, even when her own body ached from endless labor in the fields and market. Sick. Hospital. Bad. Asking for her. The words seemed to blur on the small screen, the harsh light suddenly too bright, stinging her eyes. A cold wave washed over her, starting in her stomach and spreading outwards, making her limbs heavy and weak, turning her bones to water. She leaned heavily against the cool painted wall of the pantry, pressing her forehead against its surface, the rough texture grounding her slightly. No, not Mama. Not now. Not when she was so far away, trapped in this gilded cage. Alara's number was already highlighted on the screen. With trembling fingers that barely obeyed her, she pressed call. It rang, each tone a hammer blow against her racing heart, a sound that seemed deafening in the small, silent space. Then Ilara's voice came through, thick with tears, barely recognizable, thin and reedy with distress. Anya. Ilara. What is it? What happened? Mama? Oh, Anya. She's... The doctor said a massive stroke. Last night. We found her this morning. She didn't wake up. Ilara's voice broke completely, dissolving into racking, heartbroken sobs on the other end of the line. She's gone, Anya. Mama's gone. The world tilted violently. Gone. The word didn't make sense. How could she be gone? She was Mama. She was strength and warmth and home. She was the scent of baking bread, the sound of a familiar lullaby, the feeling of safety. Anya slid down the wall, her legs giving out completely from beneath her, collapsing onto the cool floor of the pantry. The phone clattered against the wall but remained in her numb grip. She sat huddled there, listening to her younger sister's heartbroken cries echoing down the wire, unable to form a single word herself, trapped in the sudden, crushing weight of reality. Tears tracked silent, hot paths through the dust on her cheeks, blurring her vision. Gone. The silence of the estate no longer felt merely expensive or oppressive. It felt vast, empty, and filled with a terrifying, echoing void where her mother's laughter used to be. She didn't know how long she sat there, curled on the floor. Minutes? An hour? Time ceased to exist, collapsing in on itself. The sounds of the house, the distant clinking of china, the murmur of voices that now seemed impossibly far away, seemed to recede, muffled by the roar in her ears, the screaming silence of her grief. Her mother, her anchor. The last time she'd seen her was over a year ago. She had promised to visit soon. Just a few months, she had said. Work was busy, she had written. The Sterlings needed her, especially with the upcoming events. Promises whispered into letters. Promises that felt like dust now. She hadn't even been there. She hadn't held her hand. Eventually, the cold of the floor seeped through her thin uniform, chilling her to the bone. And the practical part of her, the part trained by years of relentless service, the part that understood duty and consequence, began to reassert itself, albeit shakily. She couldn't stay here. Not like this. Not crumpled on the floor, drowning in silent tears. She had to do something. Go home, see her sisters, bury her mother, say goodbye properly. The simple, undeniable needs of a daughter, raw and urgent. This was not a minor illness, a temporary setback. This was final. This was her mother. She pushed herself up, using the pantry wall for support, her limbs stiff and protesting. Her back ached, her head throbbed, but the physical discomfort was a dull counterpoint to the searing pain in her chest, the hollowed-out feeling in her gut. She wiped her face with the back of her hand, the motion rough and desperate, taking deep, shuddering breaths that did little to calm her racing heart. She had to go back out there, face them, tell them again, clearly this time, through the shock and the tears. Ask, beg if necessary. The thought turned her stomach, made her feel small and pathetic, but there was no other way. She could not miss this. Not for all the money in the world, not for any job, not even for the fragile security this position offered. Stepping back into the dining room felt like walking onto a stage where she had forgotten her lines, where the lights were too bright and the other actors were speaking a language she no longer understood. The Sterlings were still at the table, largely as she had left them, the remnants of breakfast scattered before them, half-eaten toast, cooling coffee, discarded napkins. Mrs. Sterling was examining her reflection in the polished surface of a silver spoon, her face a study in placid self-regard. Clarissa was complaining loudly about the Wi-Fi signal being too weak to stream her favorite show. Bianca was scrolling through social media, a faint, bored expression on her face. They hadn't even noticed her absence. brief as it might have been in their perception of time. Anya, did you get that hot water? The pot is quite cool, Mrs. Sterling asked, finally looking up, a flicker of mild impatience in her perfectly made-up eyes, as though Anya's brief disappearance was a minor dereliction of duty. Yes, ma'am. Anya's voice was rough, strained, barely a whisper. She cleared her throat, the sound loud and awkward in the polished silence. She had to say it again, clearly. Ma'am, sir, I received some very bad news. While I was in the pantry, my mother, she passed away last night. The room fell silent once more. Not a silence of sympathy, not a shared moment of human sorrow, but a silence of surprise, perhaps mild awkwardness, a brief pause in the rhythm of their comfortable lives. Mr. Sterling lowered his newspaper, letting it rest on the table with a soft rustle, his expression one of faint annoyance, as if Anya had just announced a minor, inconvenient plumbing issue, something that would disrupt the smooth running of the house. Clarissa and Bianca finally looked up from their phones, expressions blank, eyes slightly narrowed, trying to process this unexpected interruption. Aura passed away? Mrs. Sterling repeated, her voice cool and utterly lacking in inflection, as though discussing the weather. Oh, I see. Well, that is most unfortunate, Anya. Truly. For you, of course. She paused, taking a slow, deliberate sip of her tea, her eyes assessing Anya over the rim of the cup. But you understand the situation, I presume? The society dinner is Friday evening. Judge Albright and his wife will be here, along with several other important guests. The house must be absolutely impeccable, every detail accounted for. There is simply no time for absences right now, not of any duration. Ma'am, with respect, Anya said, her voice trembling despite her desperate efforts to control it, to keep it level and calm. It is my mother, my only mother. I need to go home for the funeral. My sister Alara, she is alone there with our younger sister. They need me. Mr. Sterling cleared his throat again, a dry, rustling sound. Yes, Anya, we understand it's family, and we sympathize, of course, deeply. The word felt hollow, weightless, falling into the space between them like a dead leaf. But as Mrs. Sterling said, the timing is quite poor. Exceptionally poor, in fact. We are relying on you entirely for Friday. The catering staff is minimal, brought in only for the cooking. You handle everything else: the service, the flow, the readiness of the house. You are indispensable for these events. He said the word indispensable not as a testament to her value as a person, but as a statement of fact about her function, a chain rather than a compliment. Perhaps you could go after Friday, for just a few days? The funeral could wait, surely. Or someone else could handle the arrangements? Sir, the funeral will be in 2 or 3 days, Anya pleaded, the words catching in her throat, sharp with unshed tears. It cannot wait. I could go just until Saturday morning, just a few days. I will come back immediately after. Mrs. Sterling sighed dramatically, a sound of weary, put-upon exasperation, as if Anya was being deliberately difficult. Anya, be realistic. A few days? Your village is hours away by train, isn't it? A funeral is not a quick affair. There are customs, family gatherings, and who would do your extensive duties while you are gone? The daily cleaning, the marketing, the preparation for the gala itself. We cannot simply conjure a replacement of your caliber overnight. She said caliber again, the subtle emphasis highlighting her irreplaceability in this specific, inconvenient situation, not her inherent worth. Finding someone suitable takes time. Training, something we do not have this week. We appreciate your dedication, Anya, Mr. Sterling added, leaning forward slightly, adopting a tone of paternalistic concern that felt entirely false. We truly do, and we are sorry for your loss, but duty calls, to both of us, to all of us in this household. Perhaps, perhaps your family can manage this without you. Surely, they will understand the importance of your position here, your good salary, your comfortable living situation, your security. He trailed off, the implication clear. Brutal. Your job, the source of their survival, versus your mother's memory. The final act of love and respect. He was not offering comfort, but a transaction. Your grief for our convenience, your goodbye for our gala. Anya stood rooted to the spot, caught between the immovable force of their breathtaking indifference and the irresistible, primal pull of her grief and obligation to her family. They saw her loss not as a personal tragedy of immense proportions, but as a logistical problem, a disruption to their carefully ordered world. Her mother's death was an inconvenience. Her need to mourn, to simply be with her family in their time of sorrow, was an absence that couldn't be afforded, a luxury she was apparently not entitled to. 15 years. 15 years she had given them, her youth, her energy, her silence, her very self, polished down to a smooth, efficient surface. And in her moment of deepest pain, facing the final, irreversible loss of her mother, they offered her a choice between her job and her family, framed it not as a matter of humanity or compassion, but as a matter of duty and security. Their security, not hers. The daughters had returned to their phones, the brief flicker of human interest extinguished as the conversation ceased to be about them or their immediate comforts. The air in the room grew thick again with the Sterling's unspoken expectation. They waited, Mrs. Sterling arranging her features into a mask of patient tolerance for Anya's distressing but ultimately manageable outburst. Mr. Sterling rustling his paper as if preparing to return to more important matters. They waited for the inevitable nod, the murmured, "Yes, ma'am." The quiet retreat back into the role of efficient, invisible help. They waited for her to swallow her grief like she swallowed their daily slights, to push down the anguish and return to her tasks as if nothing significant had occurred, to mourn on their time, after their event, after the house was quiet and her personal sorrow wouldn't disrupt the smooth flow of their lives. But something fundamental had fractured inside Anya. The carefully constructed walls she had built around her heart, the discipline of 15 years spent erasing herself, had crumbled. Her mother was gone. The anchor of her sacrifice, the justification for enduring the loneliness and the casual cruelties, the reason she told herself this life was worthwhile, it was gone. And the people she had served with unwavering loyalty for a decade and a half couldn't even offer a moment of genuine empathy, only calculations of inconvenience. She didn't give them the answer they expected. She didn't speak at all. Instead, she performed a small, almost unconscious act of rebellion. She turned. Slowly, deliberately, her body stiff not just with shock, but with a nascent, unfamiliar resolve. She didn't look at their faces again. She couldn't bear the sight of their composed indifference. To meet their eyes now felt like a betrayal of her mother, of her own raw grief. She found, somewhere in the wreckage of her composure, a spark of dignity that refused to be extinguished, that refused to beg. She walked out of the dining room. Her footsteps, usually so silent on the thick Persian rug, felt heavy, weighted. As she stepped onto the polished parquet floor of the grand hallway, the sound seemed to echo slightly in the vast space, a small assertion of her presence in a house designed to absorb her. She didn't turn towards the kitchen, towards the waiting sink full of delicate china, the half-eaten breakfast plates, the endless cycle of tasks. Instead, she turned towards the shadowed archway that led to the servants' wing, towards the narrow hidden staircase she used countless times a day, the artery connecting the gilded cage to its functional underbelly. The back staircase was narrow, steep, utilitarian, smelling faintly of lemon polish, old wood, and stale air. a stark contrast to the sweeping, carpeted grandeur of the main staircase the Sterlings and their guests used. She climbed it automatically, her hand trailing lightly on the worn wooden railing. Each step an effort not just of physical exertion, but of will. Up one flight, then another, her legs aching with a fatigue that went deeper than muscle, her lungs burning with the shallow breaths she was struggling to take. She reached the door to the servants' corridor on the second floor, a long, dim passage lined with identical, anonymous doors, painted a nondescript beige. Her door was the last one on the left, tucked into a corner, easily overlooked. She pushed the door open and stepped inside the small, windowless room that had been her private space, her sanctuary, her prison for 15 years. It was Spartan to the point of being bleak. A narrow cot with a thin, lumpy mattress, covered by a rough, gray blanket, folded precisely at the foot. A single wooden chair, scarred and utilitarian. A small, chipped nightstand beside the bed. A built-in closet that contained her few identical gray uniforms and one worn set of civilian clothes. A simple skirt and blouse saved for rare trips home. There were no pictures on the walls, no books, no personal belongings scattered around. Nothing to indicate that a unique human being with memories and dreams lived here. Any attempt to personalize the space, a postcard from her sister pinned to the wall, a small woven mat brought from home, had been met with quiet disapproval or outright prohibition years ago. We prefer the rooms to be uniform, Anya. Keeps things tidy and professional. Mrs. Sterling's voice, calm and utterly controlling, echoed in her memory. Professionalism meant erasing herself. She closed the door behind her, the latch clicking softly, plunging the room into near darkness, save for the thin sliver of light filtering in from under the door. She leaned her back against the wood, the coolness seeping through her uniform, and slid down until she was sitting on the cold linoleum floor, her knees pulled up to her chest. And then, the carefully contained tears she had held back in the dining room, the tears she had choked down in the hallway, finally came. They weren't quiet, polite tears designed not to disturb. They were wrenching sobs, tearing through her chest, shaking her entire body with a violence that frightened her. Grief for her mother, sharp and devastating. A physical pain that felt like her heart was being ripped out. Anger at the Sterlings, cold and bitter. A rising tide of resentment for 15 years of dismissal, culminating in this final, unbearable cruelty. Despair at the impossible situation she was in, trapped between loss and obligation. 15 years. And for what? To be told her mother's death was inconvenient? Her hand, trembling uncontrollably, reached for the nightstand drawer. She fumbled with the small wooden knob, pulling it open with a jerky motion. Inside, nestled alongside a small sewing kit with spools of gray and black thread, a half-used bar of cheap, unscented soap, and a few folded letters from Alara, was the single photograph she possessed. Her mother, standing in their small, sun-drenched yard back in the village, squinting slightly against the light, holding a plump brown chicken under one arm, a wide, gap-toothed smile stretching across her face, her eyes crinkling at the corners with unrehearsed joy. Taken years ago, on one of Anya's rare visits home, captured by Alara with a borrowed camera. Anya picked up the faded, dog-eared photo, the cardboard soft and worn from countless times she had held it in secret. She pressed it to her chest, curling around it on the floor, rocking back and forth gently, the sobs continuing raw and unrestrained, muffled against her own knees. "Mama." She whispered the word into the silent, airless room, the sound swallowed by the thick, oppressive quiet. Mama. She remembered the feel of her mother's arms around her, strong and comforting despite her small stature. The smell of her hair, like wood smoke and dried chamomile flowers. The way she could tell stories, folk tales from the village, that made even the hardest day feel lighter, imbued with a quiet magic. Mama, who had worked tirelessly, without complaint, from dawn till dusk, in the fields and the market, to give her 3 daughters a chance at a life better than hers, a life with choices. Mama, who had been so proud, so tearfully proud, of Anya for getting the prestigious job with the wealthy Sterling family in the city, believing it was a sign of success, of escape from the village's limitations, a testament to Anya's intelligence and worth. What would Mama think now, knowing that this prestigious job meant her daughter couldn't even come home to say goodbye? The thought twisted the knife already lodged in her heart, bringing a fresh wave of tears. She sat there on the cold floor until the storm of weeping subsided, leaving her utterly drained, hollowed out, the silence of the room pressing in on her like a physical weight. Her uniform felt scratchy and heavy against her skin. Her head throbbed with a dull, persistent ache. Her eyes burned from crying. The initial shock began to wear off, replaced by a profound weariness and a chilling numbness, a merciful shroud dulling the sharpest edges of her pain. But beneath the numbness, something else was beginning to stir, a cold, hard core of resolve. It wasn't fiery anger anymore, it was something quieter, deeper, colder. She had to go home. It wasn't a question, wasn't a plea. It was a fact. Nothing else mattered. The Sterlings, their society dinner, their important guests, their talk of security and duty. None of it held any weight against the irreversible finality of her mother's death, against the image of Alara and Sophia waiting for her, alone. But how? The practicalities crashed back in, stark and brutal. How would she go? The funeral would likely be in 2 or 3 days, as Alara had implied urgency. The train ride home was long, several hours through the changing landscape. She needed to buy a ticket, an expensive, last-minute fare. She needed money. She had her monthly wages, saved meticulously in a small tin hidden under her mattress, most of which was earmarked to be sent home at the end of the week. She kept only a small amount for absolute necessities, and the cost of a pre-booked, cheaper train ticket home for her planned visit in a few months. Was the cash she had on hand enough for an emergency trip, for the train, for potential expenses back home, and the consequences? If she left now, just walked out the door without permission, without serving out the week, the Sterlings would absolutely make good on their threat. Her position, the source of her income for 15 years, would be gone instantly. The regular stream of money sent home, the money that paid for Sophia's nursing school fees, the money that helped Alara manage the household, would stop. What would happen to them? Would they be all right without her support? Alara was only just finishing her teacher training, not yet earning a full wage. Sophia had another year of studies. The security the Sterlings spoke of, however conditional and dehumanizing, wasn't just for her. It was the fragile lifeline for her entire family. Losing it felt like cutting the rope while they were still climbing. The fear was a bitter, metallic taste in her mouth. Fear of the unknown future. Fear of poverty returning, not just for her, but pulling her sisters back down with her. Fear of the Sterlings' reaction, their quiet, dismissive power. They might not actively seek to harm her once she was gone. People like them rarely bothered with those they considered beneath them. But they wouldn't lift a finger to help, wouldn't provide a reference, would simply erase her 15 years of service as if she had never existed. Replace her, forget her. She pushed herself stiffly up from the floor, her joints protesting. The silence of the room felt less like a sanctuary now and more like a cage, the walls closing in. She had to move. She had to think clearly, away from the raw emotion. The house above and around her was fully awake now. She could hear the clearer sounds filtering through the thick walls and floorboards, a distant door closing firmly, the higher-pitched laughter of one of the daughters, the steady rhythm of footsteps pacing in the study above, the muffled sound of the telephone ringing downstairs. Life for the Sterlings was proceeding as planned. Utterly oblivious to the earthquake that had just devastated her small corner of their world. She walked out of her room, leaving the door slightly ajar, the dim light of the corridor spilling onto the floor. She moved silently down the servants' corridor towards the back stairs again. Not down to the kitchen yet. She couldn't face the normalcy of work, the expectation in the eyes of the cook or the other occasional staff. She needed air. She needed space to think, away from the constant demands and the oppressive, judgmental atmosphere of the main house. She found herself walking down the narrow stairs to the ground floor, then towards the heavy back service entrance, the one used by staff, deliveries, and for taking out the rubbish. It led out to a small, enclosed courtyard paved with gray flagstones, perpetually damp in the shadow of the towering building. The courtyard was cold, the morning air sharp against her tear-ravaged face. A few empty wooden crates were stacked neatly against one wall. The air smelled of wet concrete, clipped boxwood hedges bordering the space, and the faint, unpleasant tang of distant exhaust fumes from the service road beyond the tall gate. She stood there for a long moment, hands clenched tightly at her sides, looking up at the imposing gray stone back of the Sterling estate, rising 3 stories above her, its tall windows dark and unseeing, reflecting the pale morning sky like vacant eyes. This vast, expensive structure that had housed her, fed her, employed her for 15 years, and yet had never felt like home, had never offered her genuine warmth or belonging. It felt like a machine, a beautiful, intricate, uncaring machine designed for the comfort of its owners, consuming the lives and energy of those who kept it running, polishing them into silent, efficient servitude. She could hear the muffled sounds of the house more clearly from here. The distinct clang of a heavy pot hitting the stove in the kitchen. The chef, Monsieur Dubois, a temperamental man she usually tried to avoid, must be starting his preparations. A burst of laughter from one of the upper floors, probably Clarissa or Bianca finding something amusing online. The low, powerful rumble of Mr. Sterling's expensive car being started by the chauffeur in the main driveway, at the front of the house. He would be leaving for his office soon. Life was continuing, seamlessly. The gala preparations would begin in earnest later today or tomorrow. Extra staff would be arriving. Temporary cleaners, gardeners putting the final touches on the grounds. Perhaps florists delivering elaborate arrangements for Friday's dinner. Her absence, if she chose it, would be noticed eventually. The carefully choreographed dance of the Sterling household would falter, stumble, without one of its key invisible dancers. What if she just left? Right now? Walked across the damp flagstones, unlatched the heavy iron gate, and stepped out onto the service road. Kept walking until she reached the main street. She had her phone, her small amount of emergency money tucked into her uniform pocket, the clothes she wore. She could quickly go back to her room, grab the battered suitcase from under the cot, hastily pack her few belongings. The precious photograph, the letters from home. She could be at the train station within the hour, before they even realized she was truly gone, not just delayed by her unfortunate situation. It was possible. Terrifyingly, breathtakingly possible. The thought sent a jolt of something electric through her veins. Fear, yes, overwhelming fear, but also a dizzying spark of defiance, of agency, of freedom. The idea that she could simply choose to remove herself from their world, from their judgment, from their control. But then the fear would rush back in, cold and sharp, extinguishing the spark. What if her money wasn't enough for the ticket and unforeseen costs? What if she got home to the village and couldn't find another job quickly enough? What if her sisters needed money urgently for food or medicine, and she had nothing to send? The village offered few opportunities, especially for a woman her age with skills tailored to serving the wealthy. She had left precisely because there was nothing there for her then, nothing that offered a path forward, a way out of the suffocating constraints of village life and poverty. Had she sacrificed 15 years only to end up back where she started, but older, and now responsible for 2 sisters counting on her? She felt trapped, caught between the past she'd fought so desperately to escape and the uncertain future she had sacrificed so much to build. A future that now seemed dependent on the whims of people who didn't care if she lived or died, let alone mourned. And then there was the third option, the impossible one, the one that made her stomach clench just thinking about it, to stand up to them. Not with quiet pleas, but with force. To demand her right to go home. To tell them, not with a choked murmur, but with a clear, unwavering voice, that her mother was infinitely more important than their dinner party, that her grief was valid and deserved respect, that she was a human being with familial obligations, not a piece of furniture to be moved around their schedule. The idea was terrifying. The Sterlings were masters of the cold dismissal, the raised eyebrow, the quiet, cutting remark that put inferiors firmly back in their place. They weren't used to arguments, let alone defiance, from their staff. Any challenge was met with icy disapproval that felt worse than shouting. It was a dismissal of her very existence, a reinforcement of her lower status, a reminder that her feelings didn't matter in their world. What would happen? Would they shout back? Or would they simply look through her, utter a curt, "You're dismissed," and have her escorted from the premises, leaving her utterly stranded, possibly without even the small amount of wages owed to her? The power imbalance was immense, overwhelming. She had spent 15 years making herself small, invisible, precisely to avoid confrontation, to survive within their system. Could she find that voice now, dredge it up from the depths of her grief and anger? Did she even have it in her? The sun was climbing higher now, its rays managing to spill over the high walls of the courtyard, painting thin stripes of hesitant, watery light on the wet flagstones at her feet. The sounds from the house were growing louder, more distinct, more demanding. The day was beginning in earnest, whether she was ready for it or not, and she was still standing here in the cold shadows, paralyzed, caught between searing grief and paralyzing fear, between duty to her family and the duty imposed upon her by her employers, between dignity and survival. Her mother's face in the photograph, smiling and strong, seemed to look at her, her expression suddenly seeming less unreadable, more questioning. What would her mother have wanted? For her to be a good daughter, loyal to her family above all? Or for her to be secure, to keep the job that supported them, even if it meant sacrificing her own needs, her own heart? But Anya knew the answer, deep down, resonating in the silence left by her mother's absence. Her mother had always wanted them to be strong, to stand tall, to value themselves even when the world tried to tell them they were worthless. "You are worth more than they will ever pay you, Anya," she had said once, years ago, after Anya had recounted a particularly humiliating incident with Mrs. Sterling. Her mother hadn't said it bitterly, but with a quiet, fierce certainty that had stayed with Anya ever since. "Don't let anyone make you feel small. Don't let anyone make you feel small." The words echoed in her mind, a challenge, a legacy, a final instruction. Hadn't the Sterlings done exactly that, day after day, year after year, with their casual dismissals, their averted eyes, their demands? Hadn't she allowed them to, shrinking herself down for the sake of security, for the sake of her family's future? And now, at the most critical moment, when her heart was shattered, they were asking her to make herself smaller than ever, to erase her grief, to deny her fundamental humanity for the sake of a society dinner, for the comfort of Judge Albright. The sheer audacity of it, the casual, unthinking cruelty was breathtaking. It wasn't just indifference. It was an assertion of their power over her very being. The choice felt less about staying or leaving now, less about a job or a funeral. It felt intensely personal. It felt about her, about the girl she had been when she arrived, full of hope, and the woman she had become in the shadows of this grand, cold house. Was she the obedient, silent maid, valuable only for her labor and her invisibility, forever defined by her role? Or was she Anya, daughter, sister, a woman with a heart that was breaking but still beating? A woman with a right to grieve? Perhaps even a woman with a voice that deserved, finally, to be heard. The minutes were ticking away, each one feeling heavier than the last. The funeral would be soon, perhaps even tomorrow. Her sisters were waiting, alone in their grief. The Sterlings were waiting upstairs, expecting her eventual return to her duties, ready to resume their lives. The house itself seemed to wait, vast and silent, ready to be polished, served, made ready for guests who would never know her name or her pain. The pressure was immense, a physical weight on her chest, making it hard to draw a full breath. She had to decide, now, which path? The path of quiet, painful obedience, burying her grief and herself once more for the sake of fragile security. The path of immediate, terrifying escape, walking away from 15 years of her life, risking an uncertain future for the absolute necessity of being with her family. Or the third, unthinkable path of confrontation, finding a voice she had long suppressed, risking everything in a desperate assertion of her dignity and her grief. Each option was fraught with fear, radiating outwards like the cracks on a shattered glass. Staying meant living with the suffocating weight of their indifference, missing the last chance to honor her mother, a betrayal that would haunt her forever. Leaving meant stepping into a void, risking her sister's future, facing the world alone with nothing but her grief and a battered suitcase. Confronting meant unleashing a storm, facing their cold anger and contempt head-on, almost certainly losing her job anyway, but doing so on her own terms. With her voice finally heard, however briefly, however futilely, she closed her eyes for a moment, the cold air of the courtyard stinging her damp cheeks. She pictured her mother's face again, not the smiling one from the photo, but the image Ilara's words had conjured. Frail, gone, perhaps asking for her even in her final moments. And then, sharp and unwelcome, she pictured the stern, indifferent faces of the Sterlings, offering her a bonus to stay, calling her mother's death an inconvenience, their world utterly untouched by hers. The contrast was unbearable. It clarified everything. The 15 years hadn't bought her respect, hadn't bought her dignity, hadn't bought her the simple human right to grieve. It had only bought her a comfortable cage with invisible bars. And her mother had taught her, above all else, that freedom, real freedom, wasn't about comfort or security. It was about truth. It was about dignity. It was about not being made small. She opened her eyes. The hesitant sunlight in the courtyard seemed a little brighter now, less watery. The sounds from the house, the clatter, the laughter, the engine starting, felt more distant, less relevant. The moment of decision was here, sharp and clear. She could hear the distant, melodic chime of a grandfather clock from within the house, marking the hour, each chime a heavy, deliberate beat, urging her forward. She had to choose, stay, leave, confront. The path stretched out before her, diverging into the uncertain, hazy future. Her hand went instinctively to her apron pocket, where the cheap phone lay, silent now, holding the terrible, life-altering message from her sister. She felt the hard edges of the small device through the thin fabric. It was a connection to her real life, her real family, the life and family the Sterlings had so carelessly dismissed. The power felt, for the first time in 15 years, not entirely in their hands, but potentially, terrifyingly, resting in hers. She stood there, on the precipice of her life, the immense, cold house looming behind her, the path to the service gate stretching out before her, the echoes of her mother's words reverberating in her mind. The decision hung in the air, heavy with consequence. Which path would she take? This is the end of part 1, and Anya stands at a crossroads facing an impossible choice. 1, she stays. Swallowing her grief in fear, Anya agrees to remain until after the society dinner, burying her pain for the sake of her job security and avoiding the terrifying unknown. Choose one for the next part. 2. She leaves. Defying the Sterlings, Anya packs her bag and leaves the estate immediately to go home to her mother, ready to face the unknown consequences. Choose 2 for the next part. 3. She confronts. Pushed past her breaking point, Anya finds a voice she didn't know she possessed and speaks back to the Sterlings, demanding respect and a right to be with her family, potentially destroying her life there forever. Choose 3 for the next part. Which path should Anya take? You can decide what happens next. Vote for Anya's path by clicking the first link in the description below this video. The next part of the story, based on your votes, will be released 2 days after this video is published. Click the first link in the description now and cast your vote. We'll see you in 2 days for part 2.